Hello viewers, and welcome back to a special edition of the Model Guy in which I revisit the P-47 Razorback built by Tamiya. It was almost 2 years ago to the date that I first built this kit and produced a video log for it. I did have plans to revisit this kit in a few months just to see how my process has changed or improved or gotten worse in 2 years. But I was approached by Tankcraft to do a P-47 Thunderbolt for them for their new line of mat that they're releasing soon. Even though I was on a very tight timeline with this build, the nice thing about the Tamiya jug is that there's really no surprises while you're building the kit. So I made sure to take a few extra hours just to make sure there was some more detail added into the cockpit. I added in some throttle linkages and some wiring just to make it look a little bit busier than it was out of the box. Instead of painting the cockpit the interior green that I used the first time around, I did a little more digging and some research and found some pictures people had of original P-47 seats that they had in their garage for some reason. They were unrestored and they had a different tone of green. So doing a little bit of digging and research, I found out that that color was called dark dull green. So I ended up going with that from AK Real Colors, and it actually turned out quite accurate. One thing that hasn't really changed is when using that Mr. Color Silver, it's a very durable lacquer that stands up to abuse. So by putting an acrylic lacquer on top of it, you don't even need chipping fluid to come in and do a little bit of wear and tear. Tankcraft wanted me to build a P-47 that was going to be an olive drab and with invasion stripes. And other than that, I kind of had free reign to pick a livery that I wanted to do. The biggest challenge though is a lot of the P-47s had nice bright colors, and I thought that that would take away a little bit from the product that this was going to be used to promote. After a few hours of research, I did find some nice photos of a P-47 that had crash landed after taking some ground fire during the Normandy campaign. The aircraft was operating from a forward airfield, so it had a lot of wear and tear that I could use as a reference. And you may be familiar with this picture because it was of Quentin Anderson, who crashed his P-47 Topsy after the left wheel was blown out by ground fire. With this aircraft being forward deployed, I wanted to make sure there was a little bit of griminess and some wear and tear, especially in the cockpit. Dirt, mud, everything that you could think of would be going into the cockpit because these weren't prepared airfields with nice grass strips and some paved runways. They were basically some rough cuts in the ground that were done with bulldozers and then covered over with Marsden matting, and then the Thunderbolts and other aircraft flew in. Quite a few times these aircraft were operating so close to the front lines that they'd often take off and wouldn't even have a chance to raise their landing gear before being in action. As effective as it is to have aircraft that close to the front lines and that quick to respond, it does wear down the aircraft a lot faster. So by using some oils and pigments in the cockpit, I wanted to capture this effect. The P-47 video that I produced before was actually the first video that I didn't have it completely covered over with music and actually did some narrating for the first time. And that trend seemed to be very popular, and I decided to continue on with it from that date to make the channel more engaging. You'll note that this video isn't as long, and that's because the kit still goes together the same way. There's no surprises, and it goes together within a few days. If I remember correctly, by the end of night 3, I had the cockpit closed up and the fuselage halves ready to go together. One big difference though is that this time around, I didn't use the Edward cockpit set. Everything here was completely out of the box, except for one set of seatbelts that I'd stolen out of another kit. To add a little more interest to what was generally going to be green bombs and green bazookas on a green aircraft, I decided to do the same cast technique that I did on this Sky Raider project a few months ago. After diluting some Tamiya gray putty with some extra thin cement, I just put it on the bomb with a stiff brush and then stabbed away until I liked the effect. You'll notice I also don't go into much detail doing the riveting this time around because not only do I have a tutorial out how to do it, I covered it a lot more in depth in the first P-47 build. So remember, this is more of a revisit to the techniques of painting than that to see how it's improved. The biggest takeaway from riveting though is just to make sure I come in with some high grit sandpaper afterwards and really make sure that those rivets are pushed down and flush, because what'll happen is when that pounce wheel rolls over the plastic, it creates a little crater that pushes the edges up. So if you don't sand that back down, it looks like your aircraft has pimples. I'm trying a different technique this time around for painting called black basing, and this is something Dukes covered in his channel quite well. And basically, instead of painting the aircraft black and then coming in with some white marbling to get a faded effect, what I do is use different color paints, generally in a lighter tone, until I get up to the main color I want to use. The advantage, it seems, of this is that instead of trying to cover black and white, which are two opposite tones with one color, it uses less paint to get up to this stage, and you have a lot more control over how weathered the aircraft's going to look. This technique has a lot of flexibility, and there's a lot you can do with it for weathering, so it's something I'm going to use quite a lot more moving forward, especially with some aircraft that are going to come up with a lot more wear and tear than this one. For discussion in the comments section below, are there any techniques that you've gone back to revisit or even change just to see how they compare to what you normally do? And while you're fiddling around down there, if you haven't already, make sure you click the like and subscribe button, and make sure you set that bell to get all notifications from the channel. One thing I wanted to talk about in this video is doing projects that are part of a group build or that are a commission build and are something that you are not specifically choosing to do yourself. The Thunderbolt, I love. This was not a reflection of this commission build or the one coming up right after it. What I'm saying is when you're building something that you're not vested in personally or emotionally, it's really hard to put your best effort into that. And the reason I'm saying that is to use the B-17 I'm doing as an example. That is part of a group build that I agreed to go into, and it's really hard to push myself to do to that aircraft because one, I had a plan that involved building a little bit of the B-17, moving off to do something that would build the mojo back up, and then going to the B-17 again. But the problem is, having taken a break from the B-17, it's really hard to get back to that because there's so many other shiny things in the stash that are making me go, ooh, I want to do that next. And the B-17 starts to get pushed further and further back. Saying that though, now that the B-17 has started and on the bench, it's one of those things that I feel like I have to finish it, and therein lies the struggle, because when you feel like you have to do something, now it's become work and you don't have that same drive that you normally would. Alright, that's enough rambling, let's get back to the video. As I stated before, I was doing invasion stripes on this, and when I did the P-51 last year that had invasion stripes, that was my first attempt at it. And one of the things I noticed was that the white paint lifted off the aluminum or off the clear and did not want to stick. And I've tried it since then on a Typhoon as well and had the same problem. So this time around, I was going to try something a little bit different. I was going to put a semi-gloss down and then come in and paint on top of it. That way the paint could bite a little bit. White is a really fragile color to work with, and I had to do very, very light layers. And I wanted to chip it as well, but I have noticed that when you're using chipping fluid and masking nice tight lines, it doesn't always go that well, and there's a lot of touch-ups involved. So what I wanted to try this time was to do what I'll call reverse chipping, inverse chipping. I don't know, something cool. I can't do that right now. But what I'm going to do is paint the lines nice and clean, and then come in, spray some chipping fluid on top of them, and then spray on the fuselage color, and then chip that color off to reveal the stripes. Once I had the invasion stripes painted and I liked them with how sharp and crisp they were, and then painted on the squadron markings and the aircraft registration using stencils set up with my silhouette cutter, I then sealed everything with a semi-gloss clear. And the reason for this is using a lacquer clear and then acrylic paints on top of it is if there's any mistakes, you can just come in with some water and wipe that paint off without damaging everything underneath. With the safety net in place, it's now time to spray some chipping fluid in some chosen areas that make sense and aren't just random. One of those being the leading edge of the wing, which the reference photo shows takes a beating, and the access panels for the ammunition, and then the flaps where they go up and down. For how long you have to wait before you can paint on top of chipping fluid, or how long it remains active for, my experience has been I let the chipping fluid dry for about 15 to 20 minutes before putting my paint on top of it. And I've also noticed that I've been able to wait as long as 2 to 3 weeks before coming back and chipping. By using soft brushes and stiff brushes, it really changes up the type of chipping you have, from small, tiny chips to large flakes. I'm using the stiff brush right along the edge of the gun bay panel just because I really wanted this to be tore up. In the reference photo, you can see all the chipping underneath the aircraft on the leading edge, so it only made sense that with the crew climbing over, throwing ammo cans up on top of the paint for the invasion stripes, it would only make sense that it got tore up there as well. To be sure I was chipping the right areas, I actually found a few photos of ground crews reloading P-47s just to see where they laid on the wing when they were pulling up panels and dragging ammunition in the bays. In the end of it, I didn't want just random chipping everywhere, and I wanted it to tell a story. Following the theory of making sure the weathering was telling a story, this time around with the Thunderbolt, I had added all my oils for some mud and dirt right along the inside of the wing where the ground crew would be walking along to access the engine. The last Thunderbolt I built, I kind of just threw pigments everywhere, and it shows that at that time I was just trying to do what looked cool, but not what made sense. And look, I'm even adding some dust to the side of the cockpit where the pilot would climb in. I wanted the invasion stripes to still stand out and look newer than the rest of the insignias, including the chipping, if that makes sense. So what I ended up doing was coming with some oil paints just to try to make them pop a little bit. I'm still getting used to the oils, how to use them and move them around and blend them. So this was a little bit of a gamble because I was at the very end of the build, and if anything was going to go sideways, it would be right now. But I didn't upset the modeling gods, and it all came together quite well. And that is going to be it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, click like, hit subscribe. Make sure you ring the bell so you get notified when videos are uploading. And if you want to, you can see what's going on at the bench and behind the scenes on my Facebook and my Instagram account. Both of my usernames for those are Robbie the Model Guy. Pretty easy to find. Also, if you're really interested in getting more in-depth with my blogging and what's going on in my head behind a build and why I'm doing the things I am, check me out on Patreon. And I have 3 different supporter groups from $1 a month to $10 a month. And starting this month, the 132 supporters are going to get 1 week early ad-free videos. So make sure you join these fine people that are listed here. Yeah, there they are. So Raziel Nelson is going to be checking out this video Sunday night with his popcorn a week before anyone else sees it. This is the Model Guy signing off, and I'll see you next time.